Welcome to Bedcrime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T, and I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Happy Martin Luther King Day. And to anyone new here, a warm welcome. Thank you for checking out the channel. If after listening to or watching this video, you find you enjoyed it, please do me the favor of smashing the like button and consider subscribing. Now, let's get started. As the lawyers and law enforcement officials involved in the case of the 4 slain students, Xana Coronado, Ethan Chapin, Maddie Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves, fall silent due to the gag order in place, so many questions remain. The probable cause affidavit, while long and detailed, only contains a portion of the evidence, up to perhaps 50% of the evidence the Moscow police have against defendant Bryan Kohberger, and the affidavit is unclearly worded in several sections. It also isn't written in chronological order, making it difficult to follow, and there's just so many gaps in it. Today, I want to point out some of those areas and talk about them. Before I do that, let me share some of the latest revelations about suspect Bryan Kohberger, who is innocent until proven guilty. Last Thursday, Dr. Phil devoted an episode to the Idaho case. He had trial attorney Mercedes Colwin on to talk about the Reddit survey Kohberger posted in a bid to learn how criminals planned and executed their crimes. Some of the survey's questions were: did you struggle or fight the victim? How did you travel and enter the location that the crime occurred? What was the first move you made in order to accomplish your goal? And what did you do in preparation for the crime? Colwin suggested that the Reddit survey would be used against Kohberger in court. She said, and I quote, "If you match up that survey against that affidavit, it's mind-blowing. The very first question he asked in that survey, where he's trying to ask about the emotions that people are feeling when they're committing crimes, is, how did you target your victims? Well, you go back to the affidavit, and they go back to the 12 pingings of his phone in and around that crime scene." End quote. Dr. Phil felt that Kohberger used the survey in part to live vicariously through it, and in part to learn what to expect when he commits his own crime. So Dr. Phil is saying that maybe Kohberger was able to safely live out any fantasies he may have had by reading what the convicted criminals shared in the survey. Dr. Phil put himself in Kohberger's mind at one point and said this: "I don't have normal emotions, and I don't want to panic. I need to know what to expect, what to think." End quote. Clearly, Dr. Phil has also read through the post Kohberger allegedly made to the message board for sufferers of visual snow syndrome. I'm assuming that is why he feels that Kohberger doesn't feel normal emotions. Senior reporter for DailyMail.com, Caitlin Becker, was also on the show, and she focused on the way Kohberger's survey was worded. Becker said, and I quote, "The word goal stands out for me too. How did you achieve your goal? I have goals. We all have goals. They're positive things. They're not crimes for the most part. So the fact that he's talking to criminals about their crimes and describing them as goals definitely struck me as odd, and that the person who's writing that question finds crime to be something to aspire to." End quote. To me, Kohberger asking about the criminals' goals is his asking them about their motives. That tells me Kohberger, if he is the perpetrator, had a specific goal or motive in mind when he went to 1122 King Road and did what he allegedly did. He didn't just commit this crime on the spur of the moment without a reason for doing it. We just don't know what exactly Kohberger's reasons were, and I do think he had more than one motive for committing this crime. One reason that I feel certain Kohberger had for this brutal crime was to do in a young, attractive female in an act of revenge for the extreme bullying he was subjected to in high school by girls. And by the way, after seeing that blonde cheerleader from Coburgers High School come forward to talk about him, inundating her with love letters and telling her how pretty she was back in high school, and her then rejecting him, I think it's safe to say that Kohberger has a thing for pretty blondes. The blonde cheerleader reminded me so much of victims Kaylee Goncalves and Maddie Mogen. Even a high school classmate of Kohberger's told the Daily Mail this, and I quote, "It's interesting to me that the girls he's accused of killing were nice-looking and seemingly popular, much like the ones that made fun of him throughout his childhood." End quote. Part of Kohberger's motive could be revenge against every girl who's ever rejected him in his life. But it seems like there's more to his motive. Some people are speculating that the criminology student wanted to commit the perfect crime, although I still say this is far from the perfect crime. Others are saying that they think he maybe wanted to demonstrate how to get away with a crime like this, and they're theorizing that Kohberger may be smarter than we're giving him credit for. Some think it's possible Kohberger may have thought about reasonable doubt before committing the crime, or perhaps he came up with a plan for that after finding out that a car matching the description of his 2015 White Elantra was captured on surveillance camera footage near the crime scene at the time the crime occurred. Many are also now speculating that Kohberger may have seen an opportunity when 36-year-old former soldier and Purple Heart recipient Brent Kopaka was done in by the police in Pullman, Washington, after an hours-long standoff on December 15, 2022, the same day Bryan Kohberger, with his father Michael in tow, was pulled over twice in Indiana by the authorities while he was driving home in his White Elantra to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Brent Kopaka is or was a former soldier who sustained a traumatic brain injury while in combat in Afghanistan, which led to a 16-year battle with PTSD. On December 14th of 2022, Kopaka allegedly barricaded himself inside his apartment near the Washington State University campus after the police tried to speak to him about threats he was making to do in his roommates. Kopaka lived in the coffee house apartments that were a 7-minute drive from Kohberger's digs, the Steptoe Apartments in Pullman. Kopaka began firing from his apartment, prompting an evacuation of the complex. The soldier, who was allegedly working as a security guard and in IT at WSU, was eventually done in by a SWAT team. Did Kohberger ever meet Kopaka? They both worked in security at one time or another. Kopaka was working at WSU. I guess it's a possibility. An ex-soldier like Kopaka would likely have had a K-bar like the one belonging to the leather sheath left on Maddie Mogen's bed at 1122 King Road. Did that leather sheath fall there from Kohberger's pocket? Did Kohberger pose it there deliberately? The only problem with the posing theory is that his DNA was on the snap of the sheath, not Kopaka's. The circuitous journey Coburgers White Elantra was shown taking through cell phone tower data and surveillance camera footage back to Pullman, Washington from Moscow, Idaho on the morning of November 13th, 2022, post the crime, swings right by Kopaka's apartment building. This is fueling a theory that perhaps Kohberger had help pulling off the crime. Even if all of that is complete nonsense, could Kohberger and his attorney be thinking that they could use Kopaka to create reasonable doubt in the minds of jurors? Some people think that perhaps Kohberger and company could say that Kopaka maybe committed the crime and he flipped out about it on December 14th, prompting the standoff that led to his death. It turns out that much of Kopaka's family lives near Lewiston, Idaho, where Kohberger traveled after the crime on November 13th, and some of Kopaka's other relatives live in Colorado, another state Kohberger traveled to post the crime. What is very odd is that Kohberger's father, Michael, mentioned the standoff to the two police officers who pulled him and his son over in Hancock County, Indiana, on December 15th of 2022. Why did Michael Kohberger talk about that during both of those stops? Was that just a coincidence? To me, it felt like Michael Kohberger was maybe nervous about being stopped by the police, and he knew his son Bryan didn't have the social skills to create a friendly vibe with the officers. So Michael jumped in with this friendly banter about this interesting standoff when the officer asked them what the two of them were doing that day. Maybe Michael Kohberger wanted to divert the cops' attention away from Bryan, who many have described as having a strange demeanor, and to place the attention directly on himself, a man some of Kohberger's former friends say, Michael, is a very kind man. Did the dad want to keep the officer's eyes set on him instead of on Bryan, because Bryan's hands were looking very red and his nails appeared to be all white as if they'd spent time in bleach? I'm not saying the dad knew anything about his son possibly committing the crime in Idaho. There's no evidence of that. But Bryan's hands did look weird in the video footage from that one traffic stop. Maybe the father was just trying to do all he could to be friendly, make conversation, establish a rapport, in a bid to soften up the officer and perhaps subtly dissuade him from ticketing his son, Bryan. It is interesting that the Moscow Police Department had just maybe 5 to 6 days prior to Kohberger's and his father's departure for their 2,500-mile road trip announced on December 7th that they were looking for a White Elantra like the one Kohberger drove. If I were Bryan Kohberger and had committed the crime in Moscow, allegedly, and then I heard the cops were looking for a car just like mine, I'd want to get that White Elantra as far away from Washington State as possible, as soon as possible. Although no one knows the exact date that Kohberger and his father left Pullman, Washington for Pennsylvania, I'm thinking it had to have been either December 12th, 13th, or 14th. The Kohberger family claims this cross-country trip was planned months earlier, maybe as far back as June, when Kohberger moved to Washington. But you have to wonder. I heard Chris McDonough of the Interview Room say yesterday that he thinks it will be interesting to see how much Bryan's father, Michael, paid for his one-way ticket to fly from Pennsylvania out to Washington in order to do this road trip with his son. Meaning, did Michael Kohberger buy that airline ticket months ago, or was it a last-minute purchase? The ticket price would likely show whether or not it was purchased way back in June or earlier. I have to say that I do feel that Bryan Kohberger shares a special bond with his father, Michael, and if anyone would help him in any way, it seems like it would be his father. I'm not accusing Michael Kohberger of assisting Bryan Kohberger in this crime, by the way. I just see father and son as having a special bond, and I base this on the following. 1, that it was his father with whom he took the 2,500-mile cross-country road trip to the family home for the holidays. The dad stepped up to the plate for what had to be an uncomfortable, tiring journey, not the mother. 2, what Kohberger wrote about his father in one of the posts to the message board for visual snow syndrome sufferers if we believe the person posting was indeed Kohberger. If that really was Kohberger, the only family member that he called out specifically was his father. The person posting wrote, and I quote, "I think about my father, what a good man he is, how I treat him like dirt because I have this condition and I can't take it," end quote. Clearly, if that was Bryan Kohberger, he has a special place in his heart for his father. 3. When Kohberger was in a Pennsylvania courtroom right after he was arrested and removed from his parents' home in Albrightsville, a reporter present in the courtroom described what went on and wrote this: "There was also a moment where Kohberger locked eyes with his father, nodding at him in acknowledgement," end quote. That locking of eyes and nodding of the head with his father in that moment, after he'd been arrested for this heinous crime, is noteworthy in my opinion. And 4, neighbors who live near Kohberger on the Washington State University campus told Crime Time Stories with Nancy Grace that Michael Kohberger, when he helped his son move into his new digs at the Steptoe apartment building in Pullman, asked them to befriend Bryan. That was Michael Kohberger trying to get people to be nice to his 28-year-old adult son. Clearly, the father recognized that his son had issues interacting with his peers. It seems like the father was trying to pave the way for his son to be accepted by his neighbors and perhaps not given the cold shoulder. I'm sure Kohberger's parents were both breathing a sigh of relief after their son got clean from his drug addiction and started going to college, and I'm sure they tried to watch out for him and make sure he stayed on the straight and narrow. And perhaps Michael Kohberger, by trying to get the neighbors to be nice to his son, was trying to make sure that Bryan would feel happy and feel that he had a social group he could interact with while he was away from home. On the interview room yesterday, Chris McDonough and his wife shared an interesting theory. They were trying to reconcile the journey of the White Elantra in the girls' neighborhood in Moscow, Idaho, as described in the probable cause affidavit, along with the timeline of the crime and the DoorDash delivery that was made for victim Xana Carnage. The McDonoughs talked about the multiple sightings of what is referred to as Suspect Vehicle 1 in the affidavit by the girls' house at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. And yes, I agree with Gisela K. of Grizzly True Crime, who finds it strange that Kohberger's White Elantra is referred to as Suspect Vehicle 1 in the affidavit, as if there might be a Suspect Vehicle number 2, as in another vehicle possibly belonging to an accomplice to the crime. I'd love to ask Officer Payne, who wrote the affidavit, to explain why he put a 1 after suspect vehicle. It makes for a lot of speculation, especially when we consider what Inside Edition reported about when Kohberger was taken into custody, and that was Kohberger asking the authorities if they had arrested anyone else. That could just be Kohberger messing with the cops' heads, as one of his likely idols, serialist John Wayne Gacy, did when he was arrested and asked the same question. But it could be Kohberger legitimately asking if anyone else was in custody. Were any other vehicles spotted on or near King Road in Moscow around the time the crime is believed to have occurred? The authorities made no mention in the affidavit of another vehicle showing up in security camera footage in front of or near 1122 King Road during that time period. You'd think they would have if they saw one. The label of Suspect Vehicle 1 in the affidavit combined with what we know about Kohberger's appearance in court in Moscow on Thursday, January 12th, where he waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing, and his defense team filed a request for discovery, asking for, among other things, information about a co-defendant in the case. This is making many speculate about a possible accomplice, or about the defense already starting to create a situation where there's reasonable doubt regarding Kohberger's guilt. Note that the same situation has come up in the Delphi case. A lot of people have wondered if suspect Richard Allen, if he acted alone or if he had an accomplice. So I guess we should not be too surprised by this happening in the Moscow case as well. Back to the multiple sightings of the White Elantra. Those sightings started at 3:29 a.m. and ended at 4:20 a.m. when the White Elantra was seen departing the area at a high rate of speed. 16 minutes. That's the amount of time between 4:04 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. That would indicate that the crime occurred inside the girl's house on King Road, and it went down in less than 16 minutes, perhaps more like 12 minutes. The suspect would need time to walk from the car into the house, and then walk from the house back to the car post the crime. The big debate is, can a person do in 4 people, one of whom put up a fight, in just 12 minutes, perhaps less? It's a tight timeline, and it would require a perpetrator who knew how to place the K-bar in strategic places on the victims so as to do them in the shortest amount of time possible. It sounds like a scene in a Rambo movie where Rambo is so succinct with his weapon that each victim falls within seconds. That's doable if you're strong and you've placed the K-bar so that it comes in contact with the upper torso, the chest, the neck, which is what the coroner said happened. For a first-time offender, which some say Kohberger likely was, that is a stunning feat. I don't say that in any way to give him any credit or any kudos. It is just a dark, evil, senseless act, this whole crime, that may have been done in record time. Others believe Kohberger had to have done this before, that no one does in 4 human beings in their first crime. But then I'm reminded of serialist Dennis Rader, who we know Kohberger had to have studied under his professor Catherine Ramsland while at DeSales University, where she teaches. Ramsland helped Rader write his autobiography, so she is an expert when it comes to Dennis Rader. Rader's first crime occurred when his wife Paula was sleeping. Rader snuck out of the house and then broke into the home of the Oteros and did in every member of the family, 4 people in total, the 2 parents and their 2 children, 11-year-old Josie and 9-year-old Joseph. That was Dennis Rader's very first crime of this ilk. Could Kohberger have learned from Rader's crimes? Rader, like Kohberger, if he is the perpetrator, also spoke to one of the victims, little Josie. Kohberger likely spoke to Xana based on what surviving roommate Dylan M. has said. Little Josie Otero's last words were to ask Rader what would become of her. He calmly told her, and I quote, "Well, honey, you're going to be in heaven tonight with the rest of your family." End quote. Rader then went home to his wife and got ready for church, where he served as church council president. It is amazing to me that someone could do such evil deeds and then just jump into bed and take up his life as if nothing happened. But let's get back to the crime in Moscow and the White Elantra. The probable cause affidavit said that the White Elantra made 3 initial passes by 1122 King Road. Why? Was the driver waiting for all the lights to go out inside the girl's house? Did he know that a DoorDash delivery was coming to the home at 4 a.m.? And was he waiting for that order to arrive? The White Elantra entered the area in front of the girl's house a 4th time at approximately 4:04 a.m. It is believed the car was then parked and the suspect proceeded to enter the home. We cannot know why the White Elantra made 3 passes before finally parking at 4:04 a.m. There are other questions, too, about the timeline. Surviving roommate Dylan M. said she was awakened at 4 a.m. by what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog Murphy up on the 3rd floor. And 4 a.m. is also the time when that DoorDash order for Xana was delivered. The sound of a DoorDash delivery being made at one of the home's doors would be very different from Kaylee playing with her dog up on the 3rd floor. We don't know which door the delivery was made to. It seems logical that it would have been at the front door facing King Road. But could it have been at the rear of the home, say at the sliding glass doors? Maybe. But the front door seems like the most obvious delivery location unless the person ordering specified the rear sliding glass doors. That would have been a more convenient location for Xana, since her bedroom was on the 2nd floor, which is the same floor as the kitchen and the sliding glass doors. That would have been convenient for her to go and grab it from. But then she would have had to tell the DoorDash delivery person to park and then walk around the side of the house to the back. That seems unlikely. We know from the White Elantra being seen driving on King and Queen roads at 4:04 a.m. that if Kohberger was driving that car, and if he is the perpetrator, there's no way he was up on the 3rd floor by 4 a.m. I reasoned in my last video that perhaps Dylan got the time wrong by perhaps 5 or 6 minutes. I don't think that was Kaylee playing with Murphy at 4 a.m. I think what Dylan heard had to have been the kickoff of the crime. But was it at 4 a.m. as she said? Or was she off by 5 or so minutes? Or was someone else driving the White Elantra so that the perpetrator could have been inside the house and up on the 3rd floor by 4 a.m. sharp? Is this an argument Coburgers Defense team will try to make? In any of the surveillance footage of the White Elantra on November 13th, were the investigators able to tell exactly how many occupants were in it? I hope so. Occam's razor would tell me that there was just one vehicle seen close to the girl's house and that just one person was in it, the perpetrator. But how do we explain the timeline and what Dylan heard at 4 a.m. versus the sighting of the White Elantra at 4:04 a.m.? I'm not sure. Now let's move on to another interesting theory, this one from the interview room. On a recent show, Chris McDonough and his wife were speculating based on the cellular data showing where Kohberger's phone was located on November 13th and the surveillance footage that captured the White Elantra traveling in Pullman, Washington toward Highway SR 270 toward Moscow, Idaho, that maybe Kohberger is the person who placed the DoorDash order for Xana. And perhaps he did this as a means to gain access to the girl's home in Moscow. It's a quirky theory, but we know that one of Kohberger's questions on his Reddit survey asked criminals how they entered the location where the crime was committed. So clearly, if Kohberger is the suspect, he was thinking about how he was going to get inside the girl's house. The only Jack in the Box in the Moscow and Pullman area happens to be a 3-minute drive by car from Bryan Kohberger's apartment in Pullman. There is no Jack in the Box in Moscow, Idaho. And we know that a bag of food from Jack in the Box with Xana's name on it was photographed in the kitchen at 1122 King Road after the crime. The McDonoughs were speculating that perhaps Kohberger is the person who arranged for the DoorDash delivery as a way to gain access. We know Kohberger didn't make the DoorDash delivery himself because the police say on page 3 of the affidavit that law enforcement identified the DoorDash delivery driver, and the driver himself reported his delivery to the police once he heard about the crime. The McDonoughs said that they called the Jack in the Box in Pullman to find out the cutoff time for placing orders on an early Sunday morning. They found out that the cutoff time for orders is 2:45 a.m., and the last delivery could be made at 4 a.m., no later. They also found out that you can order early and then schedule a delivery for 4 a.m. The McDonoughs theorized that Kohberger could have driven to the Jack in the Box in Pullman when his White Elantra was captured on WSU's surveillance cameras traveling at 2:44 a.m., placed the order for Xana, and then continued to Moscow, Idaho. That might be an explanation for why the White Elantra was seen driving past the girl's house 3 times starting at 3:29 a.m. and a 4th time at 4:04 a.m., just after the DoorDash delivery. It does seem odd that a DoorDash delivery is made at 4 a.m. to the house, and then the White Elantra is seen at 4:04 a.m., and then not seen again until 4:20 a.m., at which time it's seen speeding away. We know Xana was awake around this time. We know this because 1, the affidavit said Xana was likely awake and using the TikTok app at approximately 4:12 a.m. And 2, Dylan said she heard what she thought was crying coming from Xana's bedroom at some point after 4 a.m. The affidavit doesn't say when exactly Dylan heard Xana crying, but it does say that the security camera on the neighbor's house picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud at 4:17 a.m. That camera is 50 feet from the west wall of Xana's bedroom, per the affidavit. So I do believe those sounds came from Xana's bedroom, and those sounds are the sounds of a crime going down. After reading the probable cause affidavit once again, I remain baffled as to why Dylan M. didn't dial 911 after she saw the masked man clad in black clothing walking toward her. She told the police that upon seeing this man walking toward her, she stood in a frozen shock phase. A frozen shock phase implies so much terror that one cannot move, blink, or breathe. So Dylan wasn't viewing this masked guy as just some visitor to the house. She saw him as a scary presence. Now, I'm not blaming Dylan M. She's a victim, a lucky victim, but a victim nonetheless of this horrid crime. Who knows what went through her mind? But for me, if I'm terrified of a stranger in my house, even if he leaves, I'm going to lock myself in my bedroom and dial 911 as soon as possible, even if my fingers are trembling. By not alerting the police, Dylan was putting herself and poor Bethany F. down on the first floor in danger. Maybe she was frozen all night and up to 11 a.m. when she awoke. The McDonoughs pointed out that we may find out that Dylan texted Bethany F. after seeing the masked man based on the following wording in the affidavit, and I quote, The combination of DM's statements to law enforcement, reviews of forensic downloads of records from BF and DM's phones, and video of a suspect video, as described below, leads investigators to believe the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. That wording about DM and BF's phones makes it sound like the two surviving roommates had some type of banter during the period when the crime occurred. Did Dylan tell Bethany about the masked man? If so, why didn't Bethany dial 911? No one called the police until 11:58 a.m. the next morning, and a little after 9 a.m., Kohberger showed up near the house once again. He could easily have gone inside and harmed Dylan and Bethany. He had a second shot at them if he wanted to silence all the roommates. There has to be a reasonable explanation for this delayed call to 911, and I'm sure we'll find out at some time, because Dylan M. would not leave herself in danger of being done in by the masked man if she'd known what he did to Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie. No way. I don't believe that. There is other information in the affidavit that I find unclear and other gaps, but I will stop here for today. Again, I'm left with more questions than answers. Let's hope the full truth will come out at trial and all will be made clear at that time. Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories. Now do me a favor, if you enjoyed this, smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment. I love getting to know you through your comments, and I'll see you next time.